Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about FIRE and a derivative of this movement called Coast-FIRE, which lead to two different paths of ultimately achieving the goal of financial independence. If you're new to my channel, my name is Anna, and here we talk about money and travel. And we'll actually incorporate both of these topics in this video. Now let's get started. Simply put, FIRE is defined as financial independence, retire early. And the idea is if you've accumulated somewhere between 25 to 33 times what you spend in a year, depending on your withdrawal rate of between 3 to 4% of your invested assets, you will have enough to retire without working another day. For our purposes, let's go mid-range and lay out a simple example, picking 30x of your annual expenses. Let's say you've determined that your annual expenses post-retirement is $50,000 a year. Then you are considered financially independent when your total investable assets reach $1.5 million. You can use this as a frame of reference in multiples of what your retirement income needs will be. So if you say that you spend $75,000 a year, then we're looking at 1.5 times the original number, which is a nest egg of $2.25 million. If $100,000 a year, then double the original number to $3 million. To achieve FIRE, often the focus is on frugality so as to live on much less than you would otherwise while not needing to work, with the intention, however, of living that same generally extreme frugal lifestyle even through retirement. My main concerns are that this strategy is very aggressive and really hard to achieve for most people, as the movement promotes that you can achieve FIRE by ultimately saving somewhere between 50 to 80% or more of your income in your early years. This type of difficult target can lead to lack of motivation for those where this seems too unattainable for most people, and further requires essentially a lifelong lifestyle that isn't really appealing to many people either. This means being frugal not only for yourself, but also essentially being cheap with those around you, including family and friends. For me, I'm not one to go to a high-end bar and pay for a round of drinks for a big crowd, but I am a person who does like to host weekend gatherings with friends and family. And the other issue with FIRE is that this really simplifies what tax implications may be applicable across your investable assets, whether the nest egg has Roth funds that are not taxable upon withdrawal or 401k funds that are, for example. And of course, there are assumptions in play as to how the rate of return will actually play out over the years, where our investments may not perform as well as expected. This could run the risk of needing to be even more frugal in retirement than expected, or even possibly needing to re-enter the workforce. And then there's also inflation, where the approach is more susceptible to market fluctuations, especially with, for example, the rising cost of already expensive healthcare, making this option, again, less attractive in my opinion. Despite this, if FIRE still sounds appealing to you, then for single individuals and couples without kids, I think this is much more easily attainable, and just go for it. But for those with kids that are dependent on you, and those of the sandwich generation where there might even be dependent parents, FIRE will be much more challenging to achieve. But not impossible. If you plan on having a family or already do, you can find ways to really cut down on your expenses to make FIRE a reality, such as living in a country with very low cost of living. Either way, there can be a lot that can be learned in practicing frugality, as unexpected life circumstances can arise that will be better ridden out if you have a decent-sized safety net of a nest egg, whether that means being able to give yourself an adult gap year or sabbatical for your mental health, an unexpected layoff, or injury. Most of us would probably benefit from learning to rein back on our own spending so that, should the need arise, you can adjust accordingly. Regardless of whether we intend to work till retirement age, whether that's 65 or so, we should all work towards saving aggressively, as we don't know what the future holds for us, and we don't know if we'll be forced into, or more likely would want to achieve, an earlier retirement. Instead of traditional FIRE, there is another variation I will focus on that is not only the easiest to achieve, but also most appealing and realistic, and that is Coast-FIRE. This is where you've accumulated enough in your nest egg of investable assets, such as you don't need to add any additional money into your nest egg, achieving what is known as your Coast-FIRE number. Once you've reached Coast-FIRE, you'll need to earn enough to cover just your expenses, and your nest egg will grow sufficiently to cover your expenses in its entirety by retirement age behind the scenes. This is where, instead of completely leaving the workforce, You focus on activities that are more fulfilling with a lot more flexibility, doing things that are either less stressful or even enjoyable with likely less hours. You'll need to know a couple things in determining your Coast-FIRE number. The first one is, how much do you anticipate spending each year during your planned retirement? And second, you'll need to know how much you currently have saved in a diversified portfolio of investments. There are a few factors to factor in, though, when thinking about that Coast-FIRE figure. In anticipating your annual spending, for example, will your mortgage be paid off by the time you retire? If so, it may mean that your Coast-FIRE figure may be much lower than what you anticipated, as your annual expenses during retirement won't require those mortgage payments. But then, on the other hand, on the flip side, if your health insurance was provided through an employer, you'll want to factor in increased health care costs and realize that the cost of health care usually goes up beyond the cost of inflation. Anyone that's been a part of my channel knows that health is something that I discuss in many, if not most of my videos, and access to quality healthcare is a part of that. There are a few options that you may want to consider when thinking about how to address healthcare costs in early retirement. One option is part-time work that provides health insurance coverage. Instead of working 40 plus hours per week, that may mean seeing if a reduced schedule of 20 to 32 hours a week would qualify you for health insurance coverage through your current employer. Otherwise, you may switch to a company where this benefit is offered to part-time employees. Here are some examples with the minimum hours needed to work. JP Morgan, Caribbean Coffee, Whole Foods, Costco all have benefits available for people who work 20 hours a week or more. And then there's Starbucks at 30 hours per week. Another option for coverage is to get insurance on your own, whether for 18 to 36 months through COBRA as you extend your former employer's insurance, or by paying for private health insurance. But for quality coverage, this can be extremely pricey, and the cost of health insurance continues to exceed the cost of inflation year to year. The main thing to factor in is not only the cost of the insurance, but also the related out-of-pocket medical expenses incurred. Even when I had our family's health, vision, and dental insurance covered by our employer, the cost of insurance was $1,079 per month, and then we incurred an additional, on average, $753 per month of out-of-pocket, totaling $1,832 per month. You can check out the details of my spending in one of my first videos here. The thought of increasing the cost of this medical coverage without in-employer footing some of the bill for retiring early seems a bit daunting, at least to me. I mentioned earlier that traveling would be incorporated in this video, and this is where the third option to consider for the more adventurous in managing healthcare costs is medical tourism, to cover major medical needs by traveling to another country for more affordable medical care. I won't go too far into details on this here, but in short, even as a family who is fully insured in the US, certain treatments are far more affordable and accessible overseas. And so we have and will continue to seek medical treatment outside of the US, especially in Seoul, Korea, where the quality of medical care has been considered among the best, if not number one in the world, according to various indexes, including CEO World Magazine's Healthcare Index. Now that we've talked about some key factors in determining annual spend in retirement, armed with our refined figures, let's go into how we calculate our Coast-FIRE number. A tool you may have seen, a good one, is on walletburst.com, which is a user-friendly tool to give you a general sense of what your Coast-FIRE number and your FIRE number would look like in tandem. So let's see this in play. So when you're on this site, there are a few things that you'll want to understand here. This dotted gray line here, as you see here, is the net worth with continued contributions. This blue line here is your Coast-FIRE number, and the green line is your net worth with no contributions after the Coast-FIRE milestone. And then this red solid line is the FIRE number, which you would expect this to be a straight line because, as we mentioned earlier, FIRE is the number that your nest egg, essentially, once you hit that number, you don't have to work anymore. Like, that's it. So you would expect that to be consistent because your withdrawal rate is expected to be consistent too, where it does not impact what your nest egg balance is, because you're essentially spending as much as the rate of return of your investments. And granted, there's going to be some fluctuation throughout the years, but generally, if you hit that FIRE number, you're expected that balance and that worth principal balance to stay consistent. So with that, let's play around with some of the assumptions here. Let's say you're 40 years old. 67 is your retirement age, and your annual spending is $100,000, and your net investable assets, which if you've seen one of my earlier videos, I recommend that at least you have 5x of what your annual spending is. So let's go with $500,000. The investment growth rate of return, as stated here, historically, the S&P has returned an average of 10% year to year. So I like to pick a number somewhere between 8 and 9% as what the anticipated growth rate is. It's still being a little bit conservative, but let's just pick a 9% growth rate of return. And then this is also factoring inflation of 3%, which historically, that's what the average inflation rate has been. So that being the case, Coast-FIRE number would be 518,000. So if you had about 18,000 more in your investments, you're at Coast-FIRE, given these assumptions being accurate, right? So let's see what happens if you are at that stage. What this is saying is that if you want to reach Coast-FIRE and you only contributed $500 a month, you're 4 years away from Coast-FIRE. Let's say we can up this, because at $100,000 per year, we may have a target savings rate of 20%. That comes to about $1,666 in monthly contribution, but let's go with $1,600 to be on the lower side. That means that you can reach your Coast-FIRE number within a year. And now that you've reached your Coast-FIRE number, what does it mean then? That means that you likely will no longer need to contribute to your nest egg, and you can just focus on earning just enough to cover your expenses, which is great. What you can use this tool for going forward is to see if your nest egg is generally giving you the rate of return that you're anticipating, growing each year as expected, or hopefully performing even better than you expected as you check your actual invested assets balance in comparison to the estimated balance growth based on the assumptions you've made. We should expect some fluctuations year to year. If you find that at some point that you are too far from your Coast-FIRE number, then since you're still working, you can go ahead and contribute to your invested assets. If you find that you are actually in line with your Coast-FIRE number, then you can keep coasting if you'd like, or add to the balance anyway, because just because you hit your Coast-FIRE number doesn't mean you need to stop contributing, and maybe you'll have the opportunity to retire sooner. But either way, the pressure isn't there anymore to contribute every year. Like FIRE, Coast-FIRE is still about cutting back on things and making some sacrifices and budgeting to prioritize freedom and saying goodbye to stressful work environments. The idea is about envisioning the type of life you want and then using money as a tool to enable that vision to come true. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in my next video.